What's up, fight fans? It's your boy, the love child of William Regal and Steven Seagal, the first Earl of Fistiana, a Jack Slack. And this is Fights Gone By, episode 54? Fuck me if I know, we're not really doing the numbers anymore. I've grown beyond that as the UFC. Oh no, they didn't actually. They grew beyond naming events, which is something I'm going to have to consider when I've named a few primer episodes. News on that coming up later. It's a good week for fighting. There wasn't really anything going on last week, so we had a bit of a rambly podcast where I didn't have much direction. This week, I've got reams and reams of notes here. My news section alone, we've got like 6 or 7 articles. And then we got, obviously, UFC 216 to talk about after that. I got some plugs for the new Patreon episode. A heap of questions because I remembered to put my email address on the podcast this time last week. And then we got some stuff I'm just going to talk about non-fighting stuff for the martial artists, which is going to be like stretching, rehabbing of stuff. If you know, I've been complaining about being injured a lot lately, and just the sort of stuff that I keep to hand to help me out. So lots to go through on today's show. But first, let's get into all that news that I mentioned. I shouted out Steven Seagal during the introduction. George Foreman has challenged him to a 10-round fight in Las Vegas. I hate doing news from tweets, but he tweeted a picture of Steven Seagal with the caption, "I challenge you one-on-one," capitalized for some reason. I use boxing, you use whatever, 10 rounds in Vegas. He was questioned about this, and he said apparently that Steven Seagal really can fight, which sounds like a total lie. Everyone knows that Steven Seagal's full of shit. And apparently, I didn't know how old George Foreman was, because obviously he won the heavyweight title in 1973, and then he won it back in 1994. So, you know, he looks amazing for his age because he's 68. I didn't realise just how old he is. So yeah, that's a bit of a risk because Seagal will have 3 years of youth on him. Seagal's only 65. I just love the line, "You use whatever." I was talking to the Twitter peeps about this, and the general consensus is it would come down to whether Steven Seagal can catch a George Foreman punch. Well, then that's really fun to think about. Like, would this be, gloves, or would this be bare knuckle, or in MMA gloves? Because if you're Steven Seagal, you don't want him having his hands wrapped, because your whole game apparently is wrist locks or wrist throws. Yeah, really interesting. Does Seagal wear the do-rag? Does he wear the gi? Can he make heavyweight? That's the thing, though, because George Foreman is a huge dude, but even when he came back and he was pudgy, he still put in the road work. He was still in shape. He just wasn't cutting weight. Steven Seagal, if he were a svelte fighter, he was like 6'2", 6'3", or something like that. But he still probably could have made like middleweight, light heavyweight. George Foreman is legit heavyweight. He's a big, big lad. Even when he was completely lean. But saying that, Seagal probably outweighs him at the moment. If you've seen any of the recent stuff of Steven Seagal, he's always at some Nepalese monastery paying them money to call him a saint, a reincarnated saint, or he's in Russia talking about how great Russia is and how shit the US is, got his Russian citizenship, and then starts having a go at those NFL players, which I'm not going to tread in because that's a whole thing of its own that I'm not really interested in talking about. But it feels like if you've gone to Russia, become a Russian citizen, you shouldn't get a say in like US citizenship or other people's US patriotism. A strange dude who's often full of shit, and often they'll interview him like while he's eating, and he'll be trying to keep down his food while he's trying to give you a Buddhist parable. It's pretty disgusting. But if it's bare knuckle, can Foreman's crossguard defend him as well? I mean, crossguard probably better for small gloves than the standard earmuffs or anything like that. But there's all sorts of considerations for this fight that's never going to happen. Next piece of news: Tony Ferguson and Fabricio Verdum got into beef on the media lunch thing. Why you would attend a media lunch, I don't know, but if you did, you got a full spectacle, because Verdum was all like, oh, you're disrespecting the interim belt, which we all know is bullshit, by the way. And Ferguson said, shut up before I ankle pick you, which is just the most Tony Ferguson thing in the world. I love how seriously Tony Ferguson takes himself, while also being hilarious. He could just be his own straight man, playing it straight and saying hilarious things. It's very endearing. I mean, there's that great clip of him talking about how sharp his elbows are because he practices with them and uses them on cheese graters. And then he says, someone asked him a question, he says, why not? That's Tony backwards. And he's got the fucking 90s sunglasses on all the time and his hair gelled up. And he just seems completely deadpan. Very interesting and strange dude. But then you're not anybody in this business until you've been challenged to a fight by Tony Ferguson, because I was. Moments after I posted an article called The Growth of El Kukui, which was about how much he's come along and how great he looked, he tweeted me and Fightland, giving you capitalised, day capitalised, with capitalised, all your journalists capitalised, to step capitalised, in the octagon capitalised, W/me. Hashtag my Matt, last 2 minutes, you get an interview, again, randomly capitalised words. I believe I was just like, I'm alright, Tony, big fan, actually. Don't know, I don't do interviews, I don't need to do interviews with someone, so I don't know why I would want to have to last 2 minutes with Tony Ferguson getting my ass kicked in order to get an interview with Tony Ferguson. Especially when he was giving them out for free all week. Very strange and intense dude, which just makes for amazing TV. He is the perfect fight for McGregor because he's such an oddball and he will do the media and all that stuff. And I think they share the same manager too, so it'd be very easy to do. They could share all their own material with each other, share scripts. Anyway, moving on, because we'll be talking plenty about Tony Ferguson later. Right, next big piece of news. A major publication is just coming out in MMA. I'm quite worried, actually, because I've been top of the martial arts and I believe combat sports rankings for a very long time in the UK Amazon. This is more of a US release, but I'm quite concerned with it. I'll just read you the blurb quickly. This book is for all those who got knocked down and came up swinging. Paige Vanzant is fuck, I can't even get through this. Paige Vanzant is a rising mixed martial arts star in the UFC's women's strawweight division and holds a reputation for her ability to defeat obstacles and brutal fights in and out of the octagon. Long before she was a fighting champion and household name, winning over fans on Dancing with the Stars with her beauty, strength, and infectiously bold personality, Paige struggled with her self-esteem. On Dancing with the Stars, Paige won hearts for the first time when she opened up about being bullied, but there is so much more that she hasn't shared until I don't believe that for one fucking second. The journey that brought Paige to the UFC is a stunning story of overcoming tragedy, finding the strength and skills to defend oneself in the face of evil. Evil? To paraphrase Patton Oswalt, her dad better have fucked her in a Garfield mask, if you're actually going to be talking about evil. Within the pages of Rise, a girl who was so severely bullied at high school, she had garbage thrown on her. Wait, no, that's just the act of being bullied. That's not how severely someone's being bullied. So tortured she had to move hometowns. She sought refuge, but nothing worked until one day, feeling spiritually broken and emotionally shattered, she visited her dad at his gym, and everything changed. She decided to fight back. She became Paige Vanzant, a bone-breaking, head-smashing competitor and world-renowned fighter. Rise is the moving and inspiring story of a journeywoman who... Wait, what? Oh, no, sorry. Rise is the moving and inspiring journey of a woman who is not only one of the toughest fighters in the world, but also a beloved symbol of strength. Journeywoman would have been correct there. Yes, Rise, Surviving the Fight of My Life, is coming 10th of April 2018. Oh, fuck, that's ages away. Okay, so the page only just went up on Amazon and I thought it was out this week. I'm going to have to wait a while before I can... Oh, there's time to get that flyweight title shot in there, isn't there? That's what that is. Fucking bullshit. You can see right through these fucking guys. I like that it's published by Hatchet, Hatchette books, as in Hatchet Job. yeah, that looks like dog shit. Maybe she did have a really hard life. Maybe I'm just being flippant, and when I open the page of the book, I will be in tears. But I am so used to having Paige Vanzant just rammed down my throat as both a journalist and a fight fan. You know she's going to be worked into the UFC 125 title picture without much effort. And you also know that they're just desperate to have her be as famous as they're pretending she is. When they did that, round table with the most important women's fighters in the world, they had Jędrzejczyk there. I think they had Amanda Nunes there. They had Chris Cyborg. They had Michelle Waterson. Again, that's appealing to people who like sexy women, but at least Michelle Waterson was the atomweight champion in Invicta. Had that great fight with Jessica Penne back there. But then they were like, oh, I'm Paige Vanzant. Who's the odd one out here? Oh, Paige Vanzant. Yeah, just cringeworthy how hard they're trying to sell her. Stop trying to make Paige happen. She's not going to happen. Unless she beats some people. That's all you have to do in this business. You just have to beat some people, and then we'll care. You can't really make a fighting star out of someone who keeps losing whenever whenever they're placed in front of a big obstacle or a respectable opponent. Other big news, Max Holloway versus Frankie Edgar is official for UFC 218 in Detroit. Sadly, not UFC Hawaii. I wonder how many people you could get to UFC. You could probably fill an arena. I don't know what Hawaii's arenas are like. But yeah, that's a really good fight. What more can you say? What I love about that, no bullshit interim stuff, no confusion over who's the top guy. If Frankie Edgar wins, he's the best featherweight in the world. If Max Holloway wins, he's still the best featherweight in the world. And we're at that point where the looming shadow of Conor McGregor leaving that division doesn't really matter anymore. Max Holloway could beat him in a rematch. Frankie Edgar, he never fought. You don't really have that Conor cleared out the division and moved up stuff. Except from the really delusional fans now. What else is going on there? Okay, only one other fight announced for that card. Hang on. Yeah, Henry Cejudo and Sergio Pettis, that's a good fight. And then you got Alistair Overeem versus Francis Ngannou, which is also a good fight. So yeah, 218 shaping up good. Oh, and they talked about Alex Oliveira versus Yancy Medeiros today, which I also like. Oh, and Eddie Alvarez versus Justin Gaethje. That is a good card. I'm on board. Though Justin Gaethje should be in main events constantly from now on. He is the main event machine. Put him on TV just all the time, because if he wins his next fight, people will be talking about the title shot, and if he doesn't, at least they'll have a fucking entertaining fight and people will be watching it on TV. Interesting piece of news to keep an eye on, the UFC and Fox, their exclusive contract negotiating window, or whatever it is, has closed, so that the UFC can now entertain offers from other services. You get mixed messages about this. Fox could be looking to dump them, or at least lower their price significantly for what they were able to get for them, or maybe try and renegotiate the quality of the cards, which is a hard thing to do, because how do you do that? Do you say, there's got to be X number of top 10 ranked fighters on the card, or do you have to, there's got to be X number of fights with title contention, outcomes on the card? Very tricky to actually get that down legally. And not just have a load of jank fights on a card with maybe one fairly decent fight as the main event. And sometimes they haven't even done that. But there's all sorts of talk about who the UFC could go to. ESPN was obviously one, but ESPN has had some financial troubles lately. Netflix was the really interesting one, and Twitter was one that came up a while ago. Twitter could live stream events, and if you consider part of my career has hinged on people's love of GIFs. I don't tend to use the knockout GIFs or the finish GIFs unless there's something really interesting to say about that. I tend to use them in clips to analyse specific instances, or specific moments in a fight and how things are applied. But sharing GIFs of knockouts and stuff, one of the most popular things, if you ever go to the Giphy Cap front page, half the stuff on there is Overwatch, half the stuff on there is fights. People fucking love sharing GIFs of fights. So very suited to Twitter, and if Twitter wants to give them money for it, they don't really have to worry about their intellectual property being stolen when they share GIFs all over the internet. That's one of the things Bellator does very well. They share all their GIFs almost immediately after the fights happen. So very interested to see how that turns out. If it was on Netflix, that would be perfect. Frankly, just any way that I can have all the UFC content built in a way that I can easily get to it, I would just love if they went Fight Pass exclusive even on their pay-per-views. That would be perfect. I would pay almost any amount of money per month to get every event without having to do anything else. But they probably won't ever do that. I mean, the WWE's making it work. They've had spiraling downwards viewership for like the last 3 or 4 years, and they don't give a shit because they're making so much money having their own network. And final piece of news, Liam McGeary lost his opponent for UFC 185, Bellator 185. God, they're catching them up. They started like 15 years afterwards, and they're almost... Oh, I suppose they don't have like fight nights or anything like that, do they? But UFC 185, which I believe is Mousasi versus Shlemenko, but King Mo versus Liam McGeary was happening on that card. Really interesting fight. The Bellator light heavyweight division, pretty interesting, to be honest. Liam McGeary does keep losing opponents. Like, he had a fight lined up a little while ago in England, and they had to bring in some schlub on short notice to lose to him. Now he's lost this opponent, and Bubba McDaniel's replacing him. Bubba McDaniel, not really the same caliber of opponent as King Mo. I mean, the Bellator apologists, and there's a lot of them out there, which is surprising, but they do things like, they'll go, oh, but he's actually won 5 of his last 7 or something like that. And you just have to go far enough back that you can make a win-loss ratio out of a recent number of fights. Doesn't really matter. Like, someone was telling me that Fernando Gonzalez is in fact an A-list welterweight based on the fact that he'd won, I don't know, 7-1 in his last 8 or something like that. And you're like, well, no, it doesn't matter because the quality of his opposition. And they were like, no, you're just worried about fame. And you're like, no, you rate fighters based on how they perform against other fighters that you know are good. And you know fighters are good because they get known for being good. Yeah, just maddening. Why make this fight? Just drop it off the card and move it on to the next one. But that's the Bellator way. Sad stuff. Anyway, that was 20 minutes of news. I told you there was a lot going on this week. Let's get into some previews for UFC 216, which is happening this weekend. Slurp of tea. Oh, it's gone cold while I was describing all that news. Right, UFC 216. Kevin Lee versus Tony Ferguson. Main event, obviously, for the interim lightweight title. I'm going to call this episode Who Gets Ducked Next, and it's going to freak out a ton of McGregor fanboys. Honestly, obviously not about ducking, but I do quite like annoying McGregor fanboys. However, this is the problem going forward. Conor McGregor's had the biggest fight of all time, or whatever it was, monetarily. How do you sell anyone now? Because the UFC hasn't built any other stars. They're relying on Nate Diaz, who's been out of the game for a year. So, I mean, people keep telling me like, oh no, Diaz priced himself out of fighting anyone else, blah, 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 blah. But if you're the UFC, how have you got it into a position where you don't have any other stars who are going to sell pay-per-views against Conor McGregor? You should have been having like a fucking lightweight tournament on TV and called it like the Fight for McGregor or whatever. Just advertised the shit out of it, had a series of like 3 Fox cards or 4 Fox cards, and just had the top lightweights fight each other to decide who fights McGregor. Easy stuff, eh? But, what do I know? I'm just someone following this and going, why the fuck isn't there anyone who's in position to fight McGregor in the public eye? At any rate, so what we got now is Tony Ferguson versus Kevin Lee. I am a big Kevin Lee fan. He's a boy. He wrote into the podcast, I believe, back in October last year, just asking some interesting stuff, and I replied on the podcast, and we talked about like stuff that he could adjust to better use his striking, and he looked really good against Trinaldo after that. I'm not obviously not taking credit for that, but probably saw the same sort of things that his coaches had been looking for, he's really clearly improved between fights. But very young guy, very strong wrestler who's trying to develop the striking. And he's a guy who's been moved into this spot. Maybe, I don't want to say a bit early because, he could go and win the fight. You never know it's early. I mean, I was one of the guys being like, Chris Weidman, what on earth's he doing fighting Anderson Silva this early? Or Alexander Gustafsson against John Jones. But, there's plenty of time if he doesn't win this fight, is what I'm saying. And he's sort of moved into it before everyone really knows who he is. But that's the downside of Khabib Nurmagomedov being so unreliable. And they just put Tony Ferguson in with Kevin Lee and they decided, okay, this is interim title stuff. Really, Tony Ferguson is the number 1 lightweight in the world. in terms of his record at lightweight. No one has a record like that at lightweight at the moment that's on an active win streak and got those names on it. Even if you're the biggest McGregor mark in the world, you can't argue with the fact that he's fought two lightweights. Well, actually, Dustin Poirier has gone up to lightweight now, so he's fought 3 lightweights. Only one actually at lightweight, and that was Eddie Alvarez. And he did beat him very convincingly, obviously, but the whole point of the titles is that it's hard to get them because you have to show so much consistency. Look at Trinaldo, who I mentioned earlier. He'd beaten 8 guys in a row, which is almost impossible in that division, and they still weren't moving him into main event territory because they were like, he's 40 years old, can't sell a 40-year-old Brazilian who doesn't finish guys that often. So they put him in Kevin Lee, and Kevin Lee beat him. Which obviously saved the UFC the huge problem of having this guy with like a 9-fight winning streak over great guys who they can't move into title contention. But yeah, Tony Ferguson's performances at lightweight have been the best. He's currently, if you were looking at the quality of opposition beaten consistently within the weight class, he's the best lightweight in the world. Kevin Lee beats him. That's pretty awesome. That's very good for his stock. Now, in terms of this fight, there's a few things that make Kevin Lee particularly interesting in this fight as a challenge to Tony Ferguson. Let's just do all of them. His height and his reach combined with his exceptional wrestling. He's a very, very strong wrestler. You see him concede underhooks to guys like Trinaldo, and he'll do the Sakuraba hand to the floor cartwheel Uchimata and things like that. Very, very powerful wrestler, very gifted, skilled wrestler. Times his shots well too, actually. But also the height and reach is an interesting thing because Tony Ferguson is, if you look at his stats, his reach isn't particularly long compared to someone like McGregor or someone like that. But he is a sort of gangly guy. He's quite lanky for the class. He's got those long arms that you can put in the das with. And if you watch him against someone like Dos Anjos, who's very stocky, he did look very long in that fight. And he fights quite long. Lots of front kicks, lots of long sort of arcing straights that come in at weird angles. And of course, the snap down is a big part of Tony Ferguson's game. The snap down, obviously, wrestling term, but also within boxing and kickboxing, used constantly. Like if you watch Floyd Mayweather, when I was doing the primer, I was just going through all this footage of Floyd Mayweather against southpaws, and basically against southpaws, anytime they threw their left hand, he would lean really deep to his right side and get all the way under it, and come up underneath their armpit and clinch or pivot off. But if the opponent did the same thing to him, he'd just snap them down and hold them down with his weight on the back of their head. He did that to Canelo 20 times in their fight. And then if you saw Canelo versus Triple G the other day, or who was I watching him against? Might have been Cotto, might have been someone else. But he fought someone who tried to do the same thing to him, and every time he got his hips in underneath the guy, even picking the guy up if he did it. And every time they do that in boxing, the commentators will go, "Whoa, show of strength, he's just showing off there." I know, the idea is you get your back straight so that you're not carrying the dude's weight on the back of your head, bent over yourself. So if you pick him up, that's just, ancillary, doesn't matter. The idea is to get your back straight. And if that results in picking them up, it's not a huge amount of weight a person if you're standing upright. But yeah, snap down, if you want to see the snap down as a whole martial arts thing, that's Tony Ferguson's territory. He'll snap guys down while they're weaving or ducking or boxing with him, and then he'll start applying wrestling and jiu-jitsu from that snap down. Like Lando Venata, who has a surprisingly short reach at lightweight, actually. He got in on Tony Ferguson with these lovely, long right hands, and then he'd weave after each one. And then Ferguson just started snapping him down off the weave every time he ducked. He almost dashed him standing, which I don't think I've ever seen. Guys never actually consolidate the das standing up. But that's how he eventually caught him in the end. Did he guillotine him or das him? One way or the other. He kept trying to snap him down from the striking exchanges, as opposed to, snapping guys down from the clinch or the collar tie or whatever. Obviously, collar tie is going to be hard to get a hold of in a fight without being hit in the head while you're doing it, hockey style. Really, you're going to get those more off the fence, and guys tend to look for knees and stuff more. But the snap down and the guillotine are so closely related, and they're also, the snap down and the go behind is basically the wrestling equivalent. Playing off the front headlock it's a huge part of wrestling, but finishing off the front headlock is a jiu-jitsu sort of thing. Go behinds, you're seeing more and more guys get really good at that. If you want to see snapdowns used beautifully in, say, grappling, Gary Tonin does a snapdown with the underhook, which I believe BJJ Scout calls a chancery. A chancery is, I believe it was an illegal front headlock in the old days of wrestling. If you have the head but you don't have the arm, that's a chancery. So yeah, that would be like an underhook and the head, as opposed to over the arm and the head. But anyway, yeah, snapdown's a huge part of Tony Ferguson's game, and there's not an awful lot of reason for Kevin Lee to bring his head down. If he fights long, he's not going to have to be bobbing and weaving around punches. So you're thinking maybe Ferguson's going to try and work the body or something. Well, Ferguson is very good at working the body, but he doesn't tend to do it with his hands as much as he does with his front kicks and things. If you want to see how underrated the front kicks of the body is in MMA, watch Tony Ferguson fight. I mean, you could watch Conor McGregor do it all day, but his very long stance and his whoa, like Bruce Lee hand gestures, draw attention to the fact that he's throwing lots of front kicks. Tony Ferguson, his sort of fly under the radar, but if you watched him do it against Josh Thompson or Edson Barboza, he's landing hard front kicks, often to the solar plexus or the floating ribs, and he's just really wearing them out very quickly with the pace and the kicks. The downside is that he's very uncontrolled as he comes in. He'll run across the ring, pressuring a guy towards the fence, not really cutting the ring, just walking at them, and then he'll leap in with a kick with his full weight behind it. And of course, if you get that knocked offline or the guy slides back and it falls short, you are then committed to stepping into range with him. When we were talking about Kevin Lee back in October or whenever it was, I was saying that he has this reach as 80-something leagues. What do you Americans use? He's got an 80-inch reach or something like that, something ludicrous at lightweight. And the thing that I noticed, like when he got knocked out by, I think it was Santos, I believe he was stepping in and chasing him and he got uppercutted, might have been, can't remember. But I do remember he was very close to the guy when he got caught, or stepping in on the guy when he got caught. The thing that I would like to see more from him is like a look to, say, John Jones, where John Jones versus Cormier is a great example, or John Jones versus Teixeira. John Jones likes fighting on the inside with his elbows and his wrestling, but when he's using his hands and his feet, he's having the guy walk onto the end of his range. He'll make the distance, and then they'll step in and he'll hit him. And there's that's where his reach serves as a buffer zone. There's those inches that he can hit the guy from while the guy's moving through that range before that guy can start hitting. And John Jones does that very well. I said I'd like to see that more from Kevin Lee, and I think I saw that a bit more in the fight with Trinaldo. He's still got caught a couple of times. Trinaldo's southpaw, and he threw a right straight out at him, and he was trying to sort of like not commit to it, but Trinaldo sort of crossed across the top with his left hand, swept it over, hit him in the jaw. But then the rest of the fight he did very well, used his right high kick and right straight, the southpaw double attack, but obviously switched over because he was orthodox. Kicking and then shooting the straight down the centre, did really well there. I think he caught Trinaldo very hard before the end. It's a very interesting. I mean, his striking is still a work in progress. I really liked his work against, was it Montessori, the Ponzi school? Let's have a look. Yeah, James Montessori. I really like what he was doing with his jab and his hook there, trying to build them together and just build off that jab nicely. Obviously, the guy's a wrestling monster, so that's going to be his game. But the other thing about letting the guy come towards you is if you can start stinging him with punches as he steps in, you can bring that guard up, and then both physically his actual guard and mentally his guard, and you can start getting in on his hips and taking him down when he commits to when he freezes up under what he thinks is fire when he steps in. So we talk about like hypothetical game plans. What I'd really like to see from Lee, obviously Tony Ferguson always brings the pressure. That's what he does. He walks guys down and he beats them up to the body and the head and just tires them out very quickly. What I'd love to see from Kevin Lee is, firstly, the front kicks are a real pain against Ferguson. If he's working some parries for those, and counters off those parries, obviously a great idea. I don't think I've ever seen Tony Ferguson turn like a front kick into a head kick or anything like that. Doesn't seem like a real threat. Obviously can't reach down to parry the front kick against someone like Glaub Feitosa, who could turn it into a Brazilian kick or a hook kick on the other side or something like that. But I think you're fairly safe doing it against Ferguson as long as you keep the other side hand up for the path of what would be a Brazilian kick. But that's, then you can get into like dragging the leg across the body, and that's the sort of position where you can step in and hit without any sort of retaliation, except, it's Ferguson, so he might roll on your legs or something like that. But if you can do it consistently, you can just flop down on top of him, or you could just let him tire himself out rolling. Or if he rolls and doesn't stand up right away, stand over him kicking his legs. These are things like doing crazy stuff is awesome, but it's also a chance for you to give up points and ultimately like position. If you watch something like Uriah Hall versus Robert Whittaker fought very bland compared to what he normally fights in that fight, but every time Uriah Hall spun for a back kick or a back elbow or something, Robert Whittaker would just grab his back as soon as he saw it, hold on to the back body lock and win the round. The other thing I'd love to see from Lee, obviously, is punishing that aggression. So you want to be thinking like, firstly, stomp in the lead leg. Great idea. Whether it's the side kick if you're on the same stance, or what they call an oblique kick with the rear leg if you're in the same stance, yeah. And then if you're in opposite stances, the side kick to the lead leg. Sorry, mirrored is what I meant rather than the same. Great way to jam dudes coming in. But then we're talking about like shooting the left straight hard and immediately getting into the clinch or out of the way. To the body, especially, great idea. Also, really intercepting knees are a lot to ask for from someone who's not really fleet-footed. But intercepting elbows are something that almost anyone can do. You just stick your elbow up. And an intercepting upward elbow is more just projecting your elbow than it is throwing an upward elbow. But those are great. Tony Ferguson did one to Edson Barboza as he stepped in, and then Edson Barboza just stuck an elbow out as Tony Ferguson continued to chase him. And within the space of about 10 seconds, both guys were cut open and bleeding everywhere. Cuts, obviously, yeah, they factor in scoring. The old look at his face, but her nose is rouge. But more importantly, the blood can get in the eyes, and it just makes life a lot harder for the guy who's been cut if you cut him in a good place. And of course, if you're stepping onto an elbow, he's got a great chance of getting wobbled up by it. I think, if Lee wants to wrestle and get into clinches or get the takedowns, I think I'd prefer, rather than him going to Ferguson and shooting on him or trying to shoot in as Ferguson steps in on him, I think I prefer to see him hit and clinch, punch and clutch, and maybe try and trip Ferguson or whatever. Or, if he can surprise Ferguson by trying to hit a trip or something like that. If he can surprise Ferguson by throwing a left straight or whatever, or right straight, as Ferguson steps in and clinching up, and then trying to hit a trip or something and immediately going to knees and elbows on the way out. I think if he can hit him on the breaks, he might be able to keep Ferguson's mind off ducking in for a reactionary takedown in the later stages, which might be a nice idea. I think whenever you're fighting someone who clearly recognizes the value of attrition, you have to try and turn those if you both, obviously stamina meters, not a real thing, just to be clear, but if you are taking body shots or the other guy's looking to hit you with body shots, it's probably a good idea to try and get him with some body shots back. The one thing you don't want to be is him absolutely fresh with a couple of bruises on his face against you with very bruised ribs breathing hard, I think knees out of the clinch could be a very interesting thing in this fight. I wonder what the ground game will look like. I've seen Lee has done really well against guys, building up to their, wrestler's base, trying to stand back up. He'll just manhandle dudes there. If you watch the BJA Scout preview, he shows a ton of clips of Lee just doing mat returns and things like that. But Ferguson's an interesting one because he'll Granby and stuff on the way down, but he also plays a lot of rubber guard. He's a huge Eddie Bravo mark, loves Eddie Bravo. He's always in Mastering the System with Eddie Bravo. I think Eddie Bravo corners him, but plays a lot of rubber guard and things like that, and up kicks from the bottom. So it'll be interesting, because if he gets taken down, does he just try and resume, work back to closed guard and stall Lee out there trying to attack rubber guard shit? Because it's very, the rubber guard's not been super proven in MMA, as in guys aren't getting submissions from there all the time. But if you're pretty good at it, you can prevent a guy from posturing up and striking as well as he could do. Obviously, striking from the closed guard, not a huge deal in modern MMA. but especially so if a guy's trying to play rubber guard, because it's a guard where you can only try and play it once you've broken the guy's posture. So even if you're not getting the submissions, you are constantly breaking the guy's posture to try and do that, and obviously tying him up there. Ben Saunders, wicked rubber guard player. Even when he doesn't submit guys, he moves to what they call, like, what is it, muddy waters? Something like that. It's basically like a body triangle around the arms, and he'll just elbow the shit out of them from the bottom. And Ferguson's very similar. He'll elbow from the bottom and look for crazy submissions from rubber guard. So, that's an interesting situation, because that would be not what Kevin Lee has spent his whole life doing. He's spent his whole life knocking guys back down while they're trying to get up and smushing him flat, as opposed to working from inside a weird guard that almost no one plays. Certainly almost no one plays well. There was an era where you'd see, like, the odd guy grab his foot from inside closed guard, with not really looking like proper closed guard, not really looking like proper rubber guard, and Joe Rogan would go, oh, he's going to play some rubber guard, but he's doing it wrong. And then they just wouldn't do anything with it, then they'd let go. Holy shit, we've done 20 minutes just talking about this. For Ferguson, I think standard Ferguson. I think just walk him down, try and tire him out. First 5-round fight for Lee, I believe. Yeah, first 5-round fight for Lee. Walk him down, try and tire him out. Bang the body whenever possible. You got to think that Ferguson will be expecting the shot and probably wanting the shot. He does so well off the front headlock and the sprawl. I suspect his plan will be walk forward, hit him in the body with the kicks, hit him in the head with the punches, and just try and sprawl on him and catch the Darce or the guillotine or the back take when Lee shoots. So I think that would probably be why I'd want Lee to steer clear of the shots until he's got Ferguson respecting his clinch striking or something like that. I'm very interested to see how this fight goes. Tony Ferguson, as I keep saying, probably the most proven lightweight on the planet. Kevin Lee obviously doesn't have that high upper echelon elite lightweight experience, and is being thrown in the deep end here. But if he does this, that's very, very impressive. And to be honest, I think with enough attention shone on them, both of these guys can make a very compelling matchup with McGregor from a outsider standpoint. Kevin Lee, he is really good at riling up the McGregor marks, and Tony Ferguson is just so weird that people love him. So yeah, I'm really interested in that. We're like I said, we're 40 minutes into the episode, and I've only talked about one fight. Let's do some others. Demetrius Johnson versus Ray Borg. Okay, I'm going to make up for time here. Don't care. Tried watching some Ray Borg fights today. Loved his fight with Lewis Smolka. But then if you can't have an interesting ground fight with Lewis Smolka, it's because you're getting submitted quickly. The guy is so entertaining. Even when he's losing on the ground, he's just constantly making scrambles. The thing about Borg is that I've just not been super impressed with the variety that he's bringing. Like, he'll time a good takedown and get a good takedown, or he'll fail to get a takedown and then continue chasing it and get it. But I'm not seeing very clever setups. I'm not seeing an awful lot of threats on the feet. If he beats Demetrius Johnson, that's great. It would also be hilarious, because that would just be just short of the Anderson Silva record. And also, after all that hooing and harring to get around the TJ Dillashaw fight, which I actually would have cared about. But there's a reason Demetrius Johnson is the heavy favourite coming into this. Fabricio Verdum versus Derek Lewis is an interesting fight. Derek Lewis, the Mark Hunt fight, you saw everything that was wrong with Derek Lewis, as in, he goes crazy, he doesn't conserve his energy, he's not a very scientific fighter, where Mark Hunt is a guy who, his best performances have been when he's gone okay, I can't just take this guy's punches like I used to, I'm going to fight a little bit smarter. Tons of feinting, working with Derek Lewis's back to the fence, letting Lewis come off the fence swinging, and then just not retaliating and walking him back to the fence. Just let Lewis burn himself out in that fight. But in that fight, you also saw a good deal of Lewis's athleticism. He's a guy who's posting backflips to social media, and he's throwing 50 jumping kicks in a fight with Mark Hunt. Those are things that heavyweights shouldn't be able to do. He's carrying a lot of extra weight that he probably doesn't need, but if you put all that athletic ability into a smart and heavy hitting power, obviously, into a smarter style of kickboxing and setting up the takedowns, I think he'd be a real force. The downside of Derek Lewis's game is that on the ground, if he can get on top of dudes, he can just flatline them with his punches. But he tends to, like, the takedowns aren't always pretty, and if he ends up on the bottom, he'll just try and stand up like he did against Roy Nelson. I can't see that ending particularly well against a guy like Fabricio Verdum of his quality. I think that probably ends in a back take or something like that. But really, it'd be interesting because Fabricio Verdum's takedowns are not world class by any means. I mean, I've never been impressed by his takedowns. A lot of his game has been like improving his striking and his confidence on the feet, and then using the like, come on, take me down. Oh, you can't. I'm a X-time world champion and I will submit you, to ward guys off that. But with Lewis, his propensity to gas, and Fabricio Verdum does come in shape. I can see this being another one of Fabricio Verdum pumping 1-2s into body kicks and grabbing the double collar tie whenever possible. And if he doesn't get caught and knocked out with a counterpunch, everyone will go, oh, where was this Verdum against Stipe Miocic? And I will pull my hair out. But yeah, interesting fight on paper. A couple of other interesting ones here. Evan Dunham versus Beneil Dariush. I thought Dariush looked great against Barbosa. I believe I had him winning quite comfortably when Barbosa knocked him out. But he was doing... Again, he's very similar to Fabricio Verdum. They both have that style where their striking has improved dramatically, mainly through learning a few techniques and a ton of confidence and staying on the front foot. It's not like he's the most technical striker you've ever seen, but he has a few little looks and he just keeps the pressure on, and he has that threat of the incredible ground game. Great body kick. Really liked what he was doing against Barbosa, where he threw an overhand, and on the same side he sprung forward with the knee, so Barbosa would bring his elbow up to catch, and the knee would hit him square in the ribs, and then Dariush would fall into the double collar tie. Tom Duquesnoy versus Cody Stamann. Yeah, I like this fight. I will be watching it, but I don't know anything about Cody Stamann, and we still don't know a lot about Tom Duquesnoy. Will Brooks versus Nick Lentz could be really interesting or really, really bland. I mean, I was surprised how Will Brooks was manhandled by Oliveira, because Oliveira obviously known as the grappler but not the wrestler, and Will Brooks is known as the wrestler. And Oliveira had been down to featherweight and come back up, whereas Will Brooks has those massive thighs, and you think like he could never make featherweight. Or you would have thought he could never make featherweight. But Nick Lentz, yeah, I mean, very wrestling heavy style, been working on his strike in recent years, but really more of a lay-and-prayer. So this could end up really boring, or it could end up like Will Brooks smokes him, or we could be surprised by Nick Lentz. I hope Will Brooks gets back on track, because I don't like that whole like, oh, well, Bellator champion and nobody in the UFC sort of thing that some fans get. And then you've got Bobby Green versus Lando Venata, which could be a very fun fight, I think, because Lando Venata has all the weird offense and a chin made of stone, and Bobby Green likes to take punches and go na and shake his head and then not throw any punches. So could be fun, but we'll see. That could be the craziest fight in a while. Right, time for a quick Patreon plug. The new Patreon episode is going up within a few days, and it's going to be Rocky Marciano, the Brockton blockbuster, beloved character in his own time, divisive legacy, but a very exciting fighter, and a very interesting story, and a tragic early death. Again, planes, we were talking about the other day. If you want to get in on that, go join the Patreon. It also funds cool stuff like the Primer. I am working on a new Primer. It's called the Primer Old Dogs, and it's going to be about George St. Pierre versus Michael Bisping. It's going to be really fun. I'm having fun putting it together, and I hope you all enjoy that and share it with all your friends, because those are my big pieces. And then if you want to buy Notorious, do, because I've got to stay ahead of Paige Vanzant's book. That would be very embarrassing if I fell below that. Right, let's do some questions. Dear Jack, between Gokhan Saki and Aaron Pico, it was a good week for the left hook. Oh, this might have been last week. Do you think it's something we'll see more of, or should see more of, in MMA? From Marvelous Marlon Handler. Yeah, I mean, when you see a good left hook land in MMA, there was a great one on the New York card, and I remember saying, oh, the ghost of Joe Frazier is in the ring lights. But if you see a really good one just timed while the guy's opening up, it's so nice. Guys in MMA particularly tend to load up really hard on the left hook, and you saw this in Daly versus Lima, guys really load up that left hook and try and swing as hard as possible. And really, if you're throwing it from the core, from the legs, just that short turn of the body, you can snap it out very short, like a 6-inch punch or whatever. Your arm doesn't have to move a lot. And if you can do that well and get the other guy opening up and swinging, if you land that short left hook, you've got a great chance of hurting him or knocking him out. Really good left hooks, not very common in MMA, and really good tight left hooks, exceptionally uncommon, I would say. You see guys throw them by accident more often than you'll see them throw it really on purpose or consistently. Paul Daly is rated as one of the best left hooks in MMA, but he's another one who just winds it up. I don't think he'd have caught Larkin if he hadn't thrown the weird spinning back fist first and then gone for it. Because Larkin was down on his tails. He was, Lima had his tails down. Every time he wants to throw the left hook, he squares up. So Lima would just throw a shorter left hook every time he saw Daly square up. But yeah, there's tons of room for the left hook to grow in MMA. Coming out of the clinch particularly, I like that a lot. But a good, they always say don't hook with a hooker or only resort to hooking when the opponent isn't looking. And that's because the left hook is the king of the counterpunches. If you don't have the sharpest left hook in the world and you're trying to left hook with a guy who has a very sharp left hook, chances are you're coming off worse. And because it can be such a short punch and it's happening while you're working, that's why it's so dangerous. Guys will just eat it without seeing it. Saki's was wide as fuck, but he still caught the guy while he was opening up and swinging. Hi, Jack. I just watched Glory 45, or at least the parts that were broadcast here in the States on ESPN, and I am curious about your opinion of the main event fight between Robin van Roosmalen and Serhii Adamchuk. From what I saw, Adamchuk circled around the ring, almost always in the same direction. Robin van Roosmalen, he wrote RVR and then put in brackets, no, I'm not typing out that name multiple times, would follow him until Adamchuk stopped or walked himself into a corner and then winged some hooks at him. Adamchuk seemed to be circling for the sake of circling without a definite pattern other than to move. Robin van Roosmalen didn't use his legs to cut him off or set him up. Adamchuk didn't take advantage of the fact that Robin van Roosmalen kept coming forwards with no jab or any other strikes that seemed to be there through the first 4 rounds. Am I wrong to expect more ringcraft out of fighters with 66, Robin van Roosmalen, and 43, Adamchuk, fights respectively? Is there something about Glory rules that lends itself to this, or is it just sloppy kickboxing? I'm not sure, but it seems like Glory is the highest level of kickboxing. Then aficionados of the sport should be able to see fights that are more technical than that. Cheers, Craig. Actually, I was thinking about this the other day because I was listening to the Heavy Hands boys and they were talking about kickboxing and why they struggle to watch it. And I'll be honest, it's a little bit why I've gone off it lately. Also, the fact that most of the organisations are falling apart. I wanted to watch Bellator Kickboxing's last event. They got on a 2-week tape delay. Someone telling me how that's, or just what you got to do for ad revenue or whatever. And I was like, no, if you have a fight with guys being paid $30,000 to fight or whatever, like Raymond Daniels and Joe Schilling, and you've advertised it, and then you can't show it for 2 weeks afterwards, you failed. There's no way that the people who care will have looked that up already and found the result and had it spoiled, and they won't care about watching the fight anymore. Anyway, the Heavy Hands lads were talking about kickboxing and how it doesn't really reward ringcraft very much at all. This is why, when we're talking about striking in MMA, I give it we fall into more of a boxing context than we do a kickboxing context, because ringcraft really matters in MMA, where you are in the ring. It dictates where takedowns are possible, how the opponent's going to try and get up. There's tons of techniques that you can only hit along the fence. It's very, very important, whereas in kickboxing it doesn't seem to matter as much. Also, kickboxing rewards guys for throwing combinations against the guard and low kicks. High activity fights are what are liked in kickboxing. You've got 3-minute rounds and only 3 or 5 of them, which isn't a long time to work at all. A professional boxing contest for a very low level boxer is 4 3-minute rounds. So guys, go out there, get their shit in, and then, that's the end of the fight. There's not really the time to employ the game plans that you really want to see. I think I confessed a few years ago that Robin van Roosmalen I don't find him a very fun fighter to watch. His style is flurrying the hands. And I'm saying flurry rather than combination or setup. He's not looking for something to like set up a punch further along in the combination. He's just windmilling the hands and then throwing the low kick. That's his offense every single time. and he walks right up to the guy, tries to walk chest to chest, and then starts throwing. Obviously, it works great as a tactic because he's won lots of titles, but it's not very entertaining for me as someone who watches really good boxers and really good MMA fighters. Because in MMA, he'd be right on top of them, and in boxing, he's so square that he'd probably get jabbed up. In his fight against Gabriel Vargas, he really suffered on the end of the jab and the front kicks to the face. But again, Vargas, a little bit more side on, open to the low kick. There's this whole balancing act. The squarer you are, the harder it is to really move as well, and as freely, and cut the angles as neatly. But also, the more narrow you are, the more you are affected by powerful kicks to the body, the arms, and especially the leg. Kickboxing's a weird sport because you see guys like Petrosian come in and demonstrate how much footwork can affect the game. And Petrosian took Van Roosmalen to school because every time Petrosian steps in, he immediately re-establishes range or changes the angle or pushes the opponent away. And it makes it impossible for them to follow up. So a guy like Van Roosmalen, whose whole game is get close enough that when they throw, you can come back with the combination and the low kick. He had no luck at all against Petrosian. In fact, I would highly recommend you watch that fight. Petrosian is just masterful defensive fighter in kickboxing. Not very effective on offense. I mean, he lands his punches, but he doesn't throw that many, and he doesn't really have the work rate that you want from, well, certainly the kickboxing promotions and fans want. But he is demonstrating how good footwork can really stifle the game of another boxer. And it's not just that circling the ring. Like, he's cutting neat angles. The pivot he uses is beautiful. He did this thing against Sato in the K1 Grand Prix. In fact, he does it against everyone. He's southpaw, so he steps just outside their lead leg, pivots offline slightly. They turn to face him, and as they turn, he kicks them underneath their elbow. It's gorgeous. The guy's masterful and a real example of how good boxing footwork's the biggest thing in boxing if you do it right. And Petrosian just demonstrates how that works so much better. Certainly makes him a much better kickboxer than many of his opponents. It's very interesting because if you contrast it with, say, the footwork you see in Muay Thai, that's more staying on the end of the range and pulling back. Whereas Petrosian does a fair bit of pulling back, but a lot of what he does is move in and then step out the side door. Because obviously the closer you get to the guy, the tighter you can angle off. And that's how you avoid that just sort of like circling endlessly. You're going in and stepping out the side door rather than just drifting around the edge of the ring. But yeah, I mean, it's I'm struggling to stay interested in kickboxing. I haven't even checked. Is Petrosian under contract Bellator kickboxing? Because that would explain why I haven't seen anything of him lately. But the whole sport is just sort of falling apart at the seams. And Overeem was talking about fighting Rico the other day. And if that actually got signed, if Glory could pay the UFC enough to let that happen, or convince them to do some kind of co-promotion thing, and have it on Fight Pass. Well, in fact, Glory are often on Fight Pass. If Glory and Alistair could convince the UFC to let that happen, that would be the biggest fight in kickboxing since Bader versus Rico, and the only fight of Rico's that anyone's cared about since Bader, and forever before that. But then the Glory lads said, "No, that's not happening," which is really sad. Dear Jack, the term significant strike seems to be a very inefficient way of scoring in MMA and boxing. Kajan Johnson recently fought and landed very few punches. The one he did land in the third round was a very light jab that KO'd his opponent. Kajan even said he was surprised by the outcome. So if a quote-unquote jab is most times not to be considered a quote-unquote significant strike, and a man was rendered unconscious from that specific strike, what should be designated significant in fight metric scoring, for example? What improvements can be made? Thanks as always, love the podcast, from Ian. Yeah, that's fight metric, people only really check it to argue that someone won the decision that they didn't like. But significant strikes has always been a tough area. I'm not entirely sure how Fight Metric does it, but I do remember that CompuBox, at least at one point, it was a jab. They counted the jab, and then anything that wasn't the jab, as in right straight, right uppercut, right hook, left uppercut, was a power punch. And that's not really how that works at all. I mean, like, you could take one of those flicking right straights that Golovkin was putting out, where he wasn't really opening up for Canelo's counters. Compare that to, say, the jab that Miguel Cotto throws, where he squares his hips as if he's going to throw a left hook and then shoots out a straight with his left hand. So it's basically like a left straight from a southpaw stance. And one of those, I would guess that Cotto's left straight is more powerful, but because it's a left straight with the lead hand, probably just a jab. Very tricky, because you can't, I don't know, I don't think they can measure the speed of punches while they're happening. And even then, the speed isn't anything to do with the weight in the punch. The jab is the fastest punch in boxing because you flick it out and you don't commit completely to it. It's very strange, and it really just points out how much of this sport is subjective, which is why we always get into, like, yeah, but every one of his punches was worth 2 of the other guy's punches whenever there's a decision or something like that. Or damage, which isn't actually a scoring criteria, I don't believe. But people talk about damage, or look at his face. The problem is that the scoring systems are always going to be flawed. It's always going to be subjective. And really, what it comes down to is, who do you think fought better, or who do you think had more control of the fight, or, well, yeah, who kicked whose ass? And you're just supposed to go, well, I would give the edge to, and you don't really have to weigh up, like, who landed the more significant strikes? Was the majority of the fight on the ground? Blah, blah, blah. It's the more direction you give guys, the more people are going to get offended by the decisions, because it's not really going to change them. Hey Jack, it's your boy, the Liu Kang of rhyming slang, Sam Van Dam, coming onto my own show and upstaging me. I can't mention more praise for your work that you've not received already, other than to say that it's all very well deserved. Keep doing what you're doing. My question is, what is your favourite non-physical tradition in the martial arts? Or are we getting into Toete, the no-touch strike, no-touch knockouts? I have great respect for the Y crew of Muay Thai, the bowing and humility of karate, fist bumps and shouts of os from BJJ, us, and many others. Do you have a favourite, or are there any philosophical aspects of the martial arts that seem relevant or useful to the sport of MMA? I personally like the philosophy that is so prevalent in boxing, that a man can come from nothing and through pure work ethic he can overcome his obstacles, all like Paige Vanzant, and achieve great things. It has informed the way I deal with young people as a coach, and I take great pride in knowing that I have helped put many on a much better path to be better fighters or not, be they fighters or not. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the traditional, philosophical, or even magical aspects of martial arts. Oh, we are getting into the Toete. Thanks for the good work, Sam. Yeah, I mean, I believe that I do like the philosophy that, it's something that I constantly talk about through my history episodes, through history articles I write. A constant theme in fighting is that it is one of the greatest means of social mobility, almost of anything. In, I think it was 1904 or something like that, Joe Gans won the lightweight title of the world. He was the second black man to do that. Everyone called him the Old Master, even before he was old. Guys loved Joe Gans. He got so much respect through the papers. And then, when Jack Johnson won the world heavyweight title, there were race riots and shit like that. So clearly there were opportunities for those guys that they wouldn't have had in anything else. This is when the colour line was still in place in baseball, and all others. Well, there weren't really many other sports at the time, but through boxing, you could become rich and famous. Another great example is Tom Molyneux, who started as a slave in the US, I believe, in Virginia, went to the UK, became a bare knuckle. It was the days of pugilism, so he became a famous pugilist. Fought for the title twice against Tom Cribb, and everyone was really nice about him. They just remembered him very fondly, which would have been unimaginable for a guy who came from a background in slavery. And Bill Richmond, very similar story. Well, the wonderful thing about fighting, of course, is that it rewards the savvy and the gritty. well, to an extent, the athletic, but savvy and grit will get you a very long way, and they will make the difference in most fights. Right, let's talk about non-physical tradition then. I think Mokuso, which is the seated kneeling meditation at the end of a karate session. As someone who grew up in traditional martial arts and was just like, this is boring, let's get back to kicking stuff. It's something that I keep gaining more and more respect for, because the more and more you read about like successful people, the more and more of them you realize meditate. And the whole mindfulness movement and everything like that, we're finding out that there's certainly something there. Maybe it's probably not magical or anything like that, but taking time to think about not thinking and to clear your head, it's also just a lesson in willpower to sit and do nothing and not be off thinking about something else, not going, okay, well, I could do this with the TV on or with the music on or whatever. And, the more you listen to things on BBC Radio 4 and things like that, the more people are like, well, everyone's got their headphones in all the time now. You never have a moment with just yourself. So yeah, I think seated meditation, really good. Any sort of meditation, really good for you. I'm saying that as someone who's not like a devout practitioner of it, as someone who should get into it more, but I have an enormous amount of respect for what it is now, where certainly when I was growing up, I didn't give a shit. The Y Crew, if you're not familiar, listeners, that's I'd say dance. It's the like formal, I suppose, dance before a Muay Thai match. Bowing in humility in karate, really that's just like shaking hands, well, fist bumps and shouts of os, as he said in BJJ. I don't think I've ever shouted os in BJJ. One of the things that I loved about BJJ was the lack of formality. While I do not train sumo, I do watch a lot of sumo, and the pageantry of it, well, the tradition, the formal stuff, I really enjoy. Like the fact that they can't get rid of the sheer drop from the edge of the ring because it's tradition, and the fans are crushed every time that they have a tournament by some big fat dude falling out of the ring because it's tradition. But I just like all the appearances, and I don't have a great understanding of the history of it, but I do know that it's got Shinto roots, and certainly the Yokozuna rope. I believe it's from a shrine. One of the first Yokozuna took the rope from a Shinto shrine and tied it around his waist, and it weighs something like 4 stone or something like that. But yeah, sumo, the traditional elements I really enjoy, and that's as someone who, in his Wushu Watch columns, certainly has put traditional martial arts through the meat grinder. I think there is a place for tradition, and to be fair, that's something like with prize fighting as well. You have the ring announcer, you have the entrances, things like that. And I'm always like, fucking ring girls, why do we need those? Ring announcer, Michael Buffer getting paid 250 grand. How many buys is he bringing in? He's not a draw. But it is part of the pageantry, it is part of the tradition. And, it's not only the East that has traditions, the West has traditions. And again, I'll get onto shorts, but I really like guys having individual ring appearances, like ring attire. I think that's a big, and it's not even like just for the sake of it. It's important. Like the difference that not having the coloured shorts and guys having their own sponsors design their own shorts has been remarkable. Really, all you're doing by making the shorts uniform is encouraging guys to get those awful tattoos of their own name on their back, like Frank Mears, just so that people know who's fighting. I also appreciate the fact that the biggest star in MMA, Conor McGregor, they almost immediately buckled on making him wear uniform shorts and had him wear the green shorts just so he stood out. It's accepting that you have limited your own brand. Like if I had any say in where the UFC goes in the future, I would almost immediately try and buy Reebok out of that deal and have a UFC design team and say, look, this guy's getting a little bit of traction with his knockouts or his submissions or whatever. Let's design him a pair of shorts and sell them on the website. Or don't even sell them on the website, just have them so that people know who he is. But anyway, we're on to my pet peeve there. No, yeah, seated meditation, sumo stuff, love all that stuff. There's another great tradition in karate, which if you ever go to Japan and train, most karate dojos have a wooden floor, And what they'll do is, at the end of the session, you each take a small towel from a pile, and you do the run up the room with your butt up in the air, and then you all make a line and shake off the towel and put it back. That's a really cool little tradition, and apparently, like, before big Dan gradings or stuff, guys would do like lengths and lengths and lengths to build their leg muscles. Anyway, cheers, Sam. Actually, the non-fighting stuff brings us on to the non-fighting stuff I was going to talk about for martial artists. Just some stuff that you might appreciate, and most of it's fairly readily available. First thing to do is to go onto YouTube and type in Bill Wallace. If you know Superfoot Bill Wallace, brilliant kickboxer from back in the very early days of American kickboxing. Basically famous for having one busted up leg, so he only learned to kick with his lead leg, and he just made it really quick, and he could change kicks on a dime, basically. He'd bring his knee up the same way for the side kick, the hook kick, and the round kick, and he could hide each with the other. Very, very talented kicker. Knocked out a lot of guys back in the day, but he put out these videos on kicking, stretching, stuff like that. Most of them are available on YouTube now for free, but his advanced stretching video is absolutely brilliant. If you are someone who likes kicking but struggles with their flexibility, or certainly maintaining their flexibility, I know that I go through cycles where some days I'll be really good at kicking and be able to kick really high, and then I'll just forget about stretching because I'm so pleased with myself, and then gradually I'll lose that and go, oh shit, better get back on the stretching. But his advanced stretching course is brilliant. It's only got like 4 stretches, but he does them in a routine, and it's the ones that he's been doing forever. I went on a seminar with him a while ago, and he basically just said, I only do like 7 things, so we're going to go over those. Yeah, really interesting stuff, and I think you could really benefit from that. Also, the hamstring's very important for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. If you want to invert, and honestly, in the modern age of Jiu-Jitsu, inversion is pretty much a must. And wrestling, you've got to be able to Granby, and that takes a degree of flexibility, not quite as much as properly inverting, but yeah. That's a great place to start, Bill Wallace's advanced stretching. Another great one, which I've shouted out on the podcast before, is becoming a supple leopard. One of the areas of debate on the internet in the fitness community at the moment, because some of the stuff he likes goes against what other people like. Forcing the knees out on the squat and things like that are a bit controversial. And the value generally of smashing with lacrosse balls and foam rollers is up for debate, but I do enjoy doing it, and it makes me feel better. So if you ever want to know what to smash with what, that's a great book for it. I'm also well into trying to injury proof myself. Rarely works all out, but I suspect it's helped to a degree in reducing my injuries. But so I'm subscribed to about 10 different yoga and Pilates and things channels on YouTube, just for knee pain, back pain, etc. Another great one is foundation training on YouTube. I use their back routine most days, just to try and stave off injury, again, because I do like inverting and things, which generally, and generally stretching. A lot of guys coming out nowadays saying that stretching probably not good for you long term. But then again, everything in moderation. If you don't want to get really flexible and lose control of shit, it makes me cringe when I see someone like the Meow Brothers or Kayatera or someone like that getting footlocked and just refusing to tap because they're so flexible. And you just think, oh, that's going to hurt when you're 70. I had more of these, but I've forgotten them now. So, but I'll write a list and I'll share them from podcast to podcast and send them to me, actually. I mean, I get banged up a lot, so anything you got about injuries and rehab, I would enjoy reading or watching. And anything else that you feel has helped you that isn't practicing actual techniques or sparring or anything like that. Things, I'm not looking for a way around that, obviously, but anything that you feel has helped you off the mats is always interesting for listeners, and I certainly find them interesting too. Anyway, I'm your boy Jack Slack. This has been the Fights Gone By podcast, episode 54. Remember to sign up for the Patreon to get the Rocky Marciano. Buy Notorious because it's great. And subscribe, well, not subscribe, bookmark fightprimer.com because the primer Old Dogs is coming and it's going to be fucking mind-blowing. If you have any emails to send to the podcast, send them to fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. It's been a pleasure, and I'll catch you next week. Cheers.